Good evening. You're probably looking at this Thursday evening on, but this is our Bible study this week, and what we're doing is we're going back, we're looking at the miracle that we read about on Sunday. It's found in the book of Luke, chapter 5. It's the calling of the first four disciples. And so as we begin to look at this, I know Sunday we looked at a lot of things around it. But tonight we're really going to be looking at the miracle itself. And so as we begin here this evening, we're going to call your attention as we go straight to the Word, as we look at the Word as we begin. Luke 5, verse 1. One day, as Jesus was preaching on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, great crowds pressed in on him to listen to the word of God. He noticed two empty boats at the water's edge, for the fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. Stepping into one of the boats, Jesus asked Simon, which we know as the Apostle Peter, its owner, to push it out into the water. So he sat in the boat and taught the crowds from there. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Now go out where it is deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish." "Master," Simon replied, "we worked hard all last night and didn't catch a thing. But if you say so, I'll let down the nets again." And this time their nets were so full of fish they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. When Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "O Lord, please leave me. I'm such a sinful man." For he was awestruck by the number of fish they had caught, as were the others with him. His partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were also amazed. Jesus replied to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people." And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. Father, bless the reading of your word. Be with us as we look at this miracle here this evening. And it's in the precious name of Jesus that we come. Amen. Amen. Here's the miracle. We've been talking about the multitude of people. And wherever Jesus was, there was always a multitude of people. But tonight we're going to be talking about a multitude of fish. If you really go to the original scriptures and where you find the word many, you find the word speaking about the number. Basically, if you follow that out, it is the word multitude. So now, as speaking about Jesus, we encountered the multitude of people, and now we're encountering the multitude of fish. So what does that tell us? It was that many. It was that many. It was massive. And so as we begin looking at that tonight, we can start with the fact that when we read that it says their nets to begin to tear, it was not nets like you see people casting out at the coast. It's not nets that you would see people casting out at the lake. They're trying to get some bait fish. They're trying to catch small fish. No, we're not talking about those kinds. They had three kinds. They had the casting kinds. They had the kinds that they threw and that they would let sink. But then they had the kind that they would drag. So there was three nets that was used in the early days, like during the days of Christ. Now, we're never told which ones it is, but if you look at the multitude of fish, it had to be big. It had to be big. And we know that the biggest ones was the kind that they dragged and the kind that they let down, like we read, on the side let, and then bring it back up. And so that is the kinds that we're dealing with here. What we want to do tonight is we want to kind of break down the miracle. We talked more about the Apostle Peter on Sunday. We talked about how the calling involved the miracle. The Apostle Peter was kind of an outspoken, know-it-all kind of guy. And it took something massive to get his attention. And catching a multitude of fish was probably one of the only things that could have got his attention, to the point that he was so humbled that he fell on his knees before Jesus and says, "You need to leave me because I am a sinful man." But tonight we're looking at the miracle. So here we go. First thing we're going to look at is found here in verse 4. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Now go out where it is deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish." The words of Christ. Jesus looks at Peter and says, "Go out a little deeper." You see, the problem is in our lives today, we as believers in Jesus, sometimes we get stalled in our walk with Christ. And what happens is we never grow up. We never grow up. In the New Testament, in several places, it talks about the growth of a Christian. It talks about, when we were young, we would do this, but now we're adults. We need to go from drinking milk to eating meat. That's biblical. And that's the way Jesus always tackled it. We need to grow up. We need to grow up in Christ. There are a lot of people that understand the example of the water. They understand the example of the water. Take my mom, for instance. My mom, as much as we love the beach, and we were at the beach every time that we could go to the beach, my mom never knew how to swim. And the only thing that my mom would do was walk on the very edge of the water. Now think about it. If you're walking on the edge of the water, or you're just into ankle deep, do you need to be afraid? No. You might be able to step on a crab. You might step on a seashell that might be turned upside down. You might step on a broke shell that might hurt. But as far as any life-threatening things, no, you would think that walking in the edge of the water, you're pretty safe. So we begin to understand why Jesus uses the example of water. Sometimes we as believers, we like to stay in the shallow part of the pool. But we know that we don't need to stay there, because Jesus challenges us to go out a little deeper. What happens when you get in deeper water? It requires you to either, number one, know how to swim, or number two, have some type of help in buoyance, whether it be a float, a life jacket, or something like that. But you see, what happens is when we get out in deep water, it's a little more challenging. Because even if you can swim, there will come a time when you get tired. And if you get too tired and you're too far from where you can touch, then the water not only becomes something fun to be in, it becomes a peril in your life. It becomes dangerous. Jesus is trying to show us we need to go out a little deeper. Why do we need to go out a little deeper? Well, let's just look at our illustration, our miracle. Evidently, when Jesus asked Peter to push away, he didn't push far. Didn't push far at all. Because what was happening, he was just trying to get where he could talk, where everybody could hear. So the boat wouldn't have had to have been out any further than knee-deep water. But then Jesus says, go out deeper. And so what we find is, even if they cast the nets in knee-deep water, not going to find many fish in knee-deep water. And if you do, they're going to be little. They're going to be little. Jesus said, go out a little deeper. You know, if you go out a little deeper, you run into bigger fish. You run into a bigger challenge. You run into situations where you need faith. If you're in the shallow water, you might feel safe. But if we push out into deeper water, that's where the greater joy and the greater reward is. So if we're just looking at the miracle, the first thing you have to look at is how the miracle happened. How did the miracle happen? Well, Peter had to push out a little deeper. Then we got number two. We find the second part of what we need to look at this evening as we analyze this miracle. We find in verse 5. Master, Simon replied, we worked hard all last night and didn't catch a thing. But if you say so, I'll let the nets down again. I'll let the nets down again. It's morning. The disciples are exhausted. Their nets are cleaned and repaired for the fishing that will happen that night. That takes a while. It's not a quick fix. It's not quick to clean. It's all done. They've been up all night. Nobody would have blamed them if they had just wanted to get to the house to sleep. No one would have blamed them. You know, the logical thing is, if you're up all night, you're going to have to do what the next morning? You're going to have to sleep. Sometime the next day, you're going to have to get a little sleep, because very few people are going to be able to stay up for 24 to 48 hours without resting. It's just the way we're made. But Jesus is not worried about them getting any sleep. He's worried about changing their focus. So, what Jesus and logic have to do with one another, sometimes the answer is not much. Not much. Logic and Jesus sometimes doesn't mix. But what we need to really do is we need to understand that Peter, even though he raised a question, Peter followed through with the request. Master, we've already cleaned the nets. They're already repaired. But if you say, then we'll do it. So here, Jesus and Peter, they push out a little deeper. I don't know if maybe Andrew's in the boat too. I don't know. They push out a little deeper, and you know, I can just imagine you're tired and you've already cleaned, and now you're doing this, and you're a little aggravated, and and all of this, and you might just a little haphazard little toss or whatever, and then all of a sudden the tug begins to happen, and then there's a really big pull, and then we begin to see that the nets are at their breaking point, and all of a sudden Peter is beginning to understand that, master might not be the word I need to be calling him. Maybe I need to be calling him Lord. We should be calling him Lord, but he says master. So, what does Peter's words really mean? Peter said, if you say so. Can I tell you what those words mean in the Greek? Those words mean at your command. That's what the words mean in Greek, okay? But that word master, let's start there. Someone of great importance. You heard me say that on Sunday. This is a Luke word. This is not a Matthew word. It's not a Mark word. It's not a John word. It's a Luke word. Remember, Luke is reaching the non-Jewish people. Okay? That is what Luke is trying to do. And so what we find is that Luke uses this word. He uses the word master. Somebody special. If you want to take that a little deeper, it would be like chief or commander. In other words, someone in charge. See, Jesus saw someone. Jesus was seen as someone by Peter that was worthy of respect. And probably at this time, Peter didn't completely know who Jesus was, because we really don't know how much Peter knew about Jesus at all. But he's calling him master. He's doing something that is negating a lot of work and being up all night. So there was a level of respect. There was a level of worthiness that Peter saw in him for even him to agree to do it. But what we're finding out is that Peter really didn't know who it was. But as we look at those words, if you say so, what we know is that Peter is listening. He is obeying. He might not understand. He might not totally get it. But he's listening. And he's obeying. The second part I want you to notice, it is going to what it means, at your command. That is a specific phrase that when we look at it in the Greek, it leads us to believe one thing. It leads us to believe that the Apostle Peter believed success was at hand. Success was at hand. In other words, what we know is that the Apostle Peter is showing his confidence and his faith in Jesus. He might not know exactly who he is yet, but in what he knows, he is willing to place his faith in him. With what he knows, he is willing to place his faith in him. And then the third thing this evening, it would be found in verse 6. At this time, their nets were so full of fish, they began to tear. Now on Sunday, we looked at this phrase a little bit. It doesn't mean that it was actually ripping. It means that it was at the point of. So they weren't tearing yet. And so we have to remember that maybe what we're reading is not exactly what was trying to be conveyed. And there's one thing about older theologians. They tried to find symbolism in everything. And many of the older theologians, like Adam Clarke, Matthew Henry, people like that, what they believed that there were three parts of this miracle that symbolism was there. Number one, the nets. They believed that the nets was symbolic of the church. Now, you might not have ever thought that, but they believed it was symbolic of the church. You go to John 21 and you read about the haul that they bring in there, and they said that there were 153 fish that were brought in. A lot of people put a lot of significance in that number, talking about nationalities and ethnic groups and numbers of people. Again, they look at that as symbolic. So that means that when they look at these miracles involving the fish, they look at the net. And the net that we're reading about here in Luke 5, they believe is speaking of the church in the church age. You know, what do we mean there? The church in the church age. Well, it's like this. Every once in a while, you hear things about things going on in other churches. You all of a sudden begin to hear things that might be going on in the church that you attend. You begin to hear things. All of a sudden, you might have something, someone in the church that might actually say something that hurts somebody else's feelings. And all of a sudden, that becomes an issue. All of a sudden, in the Church of Jesus Christ, we go back to what we were talking about when it says go out a little deeper, and Jesus is emphasizing we need to grow up in our faith. When we go back and we look at the church, and you look at the church down through the ages, you look at the church in our world today, you find a very imperfect, the only word I can think of is organism. You find an imperfect organism. Well, why in the world would the church be imperfect? Well, who is in the church? Who is leading the church? People. Guess what? We're imperfect. We're not perfect. We're imperfect. But yet, with God's blessing, with God's touch, the church continues to prosper. Just look at us in 20 and in 21 here. We might not have been able to go to church this entire 2 years, but what have we been able to do? We've been able to do things online. And guess what? We're reaching people online that might not come into the church building, but yet they might take a look at us on Facebook or on YouTube. All of a sudden, God is using an imperfect group of people and an imperfect organism. He is using it to still be the church. You see, it is believed that the church to come is going to be perfect. And of course, the church to come would be what we would call the millennium. It would be the 1,000-year reign of peace. Satan is locked away, no evil. I've often referred to it as the 1,000-year party of believers. The 1,000-year party of believers. It's going to be perfect then. But now, sometimes we're at the point of breaking. But then God steps in because the people begin to call out. And so we look and we see the net and we think, oh, that's the church. And then we see that it also, those fish, and as we said earlier, really when you begin to look at it, when it's talking about the numbers of fish, it's just that word multitude again. What is the fish? The fish are the people. You know, there's so many people that don't know Jesus. So many people that don't know Jesus. You would think with all the churches that there are sitting around here in our area, in other areas of North Carolina, you would find it very hard to believe that there is so many people unchurched. But they are. They need Jesus. They need a place that they can go and they can grow, and that they can grow in their relationship with Christ, and they can get to become part of a family like we have here at Mount Hebron. People are fish in our miracle here. And then lastly, you find the calling of the first 4 disciples. Well, you know, that's us. Imperfect. We get tired. We get aggravated. We can be even irritable. But you know, somehow God uses a yielded heart. Somehow or another, God takes a heart for Him and He uses it. And He uses it. Yeah, that means God can use everybody. That's what it means. God can use everybody. So as we go back here, let's just go back and recap what we've learned here tonight. First thing, go out a little deeper. We need to continue to grow and mature in our faith. We need to realize that sometimes some people aren't going to have the foundational faith that you have. And we have to be patient. We have to work with them. We have to teach them. We have to show them. We have to be their example. And then there are times where you just got to throw logic out the window. And you just have to trust the Lord. You might not understand why, but you trust Him. Like Peter said, if you say so. And then third, don't forget, the church might not be perfect, but it's Jesus' church. We as believers, we might not be perfect either, but a yielded heart to Jesus and a I'm sorry and a hug, that goes a long way. And never forget, the 12 disciples are in heaven with Jesus right now. Now, by 12, I mean Matthias, okay? But the fact of it is, what we need to realize is we're carrying on their work. When you go to work, when you go out in the community, when you're wherever you are, you're going out there as a representative of Christ. So when we look at this miracle, that's what we see. And I hope that that has meant something to you folks here tonight and you folks watching online. We hope that each of you have a wonderful rest of this evening and a wonderful weekend to come. And don't forget, Easter is just around the corner. May God bless each and every one of you.